Hello everyone, welcome back to Transcendent Philosophy. Today we're talking about free will. As you can see, the topic is free will definitions. And that might sound really boring at first, but I assure you, definitions are essential, especially in the free will debate. Because half the problem with the whole topic of free will is nobody actually knows what they mean. Like, what does free mean? Like, half the people who believe in free will have no idea what that means. And people disagree. It's like every single word, if you look up in a dictionary, every word has multiple definitions. It's like, which definition? When I say free will, which of those definitions am I using? When you say free will, which definitions are you using, right? And so a lot of the debate revolves around confusion and talking past each other because we're not using language in the same way, or we're not understanding how we're using language. And so I think free will, it's a powerful, it's an important debate because it cuts straight to the core of who we are. And it impacts how we see ourselves, how we see the world, how we navigate the world, how we solve problems, how we make the world a better place. Like, understanding the truth about what's going on here helps guide us to where we want to go. And so I think it's important for humanity to get clarity on what we're doing here. What is the truth of this reality that we live within? It's very important to get that truth clear so that we can navigate properly. If you don't have the correct truth, you can't accomplish your goals because you're operating on an incorrect paradigm. So I think it's important to get to the bottom of this free will debate. And I think the most important thing for getting clarity on what's going on is getting the definitions. Definitions are so key. Half of the debate is just getting the semantics right. So that's my goal today. It's to help navigate some of these definitions and persuade you that these are the best definitions. Now, linguistics is a complex area of study. Definitions, complex. Like, a lot of people operate at different levels of thinking. Like, some people think, oh, the dictionary is the authority. Like, Seth, why are you telling us what the definition of free will is? We have a dictionary. When you get into philosophy, it becomes very obvious that dictionaries are absolutely insufficient for solving these problems. Dictionaries are not prescriptive, right? Dictionaries are descriptive. That distinction is essential. So what that means is the dictionary doesn't tell you how you should use a word. It describes how words are often used. So people can use words incorrectly, and that if they use a word incorrectly over time, that incorrect usage of a word becomes a valid definition. It's just the way language works. Language, it's just a correlation thing. It's like, I utter these noises, and then you interpret it like there's a correlation in society. You correlate these noises to this meaning. Like, there's no right or wrong definition. It's basically what people accept in society. Like, if people respond to this word in this way, then that functions as a valid definition. So there's a lot of freedom in the space of definitions. There's no dictator who tells us what the definition is. We choose how we respond to the words. We choose how we want to use the words. And so this linguistic exercise is an attempt to try to analyze these definitions and try to narrow in on what are the most useful definitions. What definitions bring the most clarity? What definitions help society? And so if everyone can agree these are the best definitions, then we can communicate properly, then we can solve problems properly. But yeah, there's a lot of chaos in trying to get everyone onto the same page. So that's what this is an effort to do, to see if this is a persuasive approach to get people on the same page. So, free will. Two simple words. What do they mean? Definitions. All right, you see here I got 3 different definitions. Free, definition 1, unconstrained. Definition 2, independent, or free from external control and constraint. Definition 3, not limited or controlled. Okay, so you need to get like this vibe in your head of the combination of all these meanings, right? This is kind of the I have this perspective that words, they operate almost as vibes of the average of a couple different meanings, right? Because a word has multiple definitions. It means all of those things. And so when you use a word, you might be targeting one definition, but there's a little bit of bleed over where all these definitions kind of bleed over into a vibe, right? So when we're saying free, we've got this vibe of unconstrained. So like, handcuffs, we're constraining you, you can't act. And so unconstrained, no handcuffs. Independent, there's no one over you, there's no one, you don't need other people, you can act for yourself. Free from external control, so no one is puppeteering you, no one is managing you, right? So that's also part of free. And not limited, right? Limited, that kind of goes into this constraint idea, or kind of like a box. If you're in a box, your movement is limited, or controlled. Control could be a variety of things. Exerting force. Control is somehow, some way, forces are being applied to you to control you. So free would mean none of that stuff, right? None of that stuff. So a synthetic definition of free would mix these meanings together. And so free means independent, unconstrained, not limited, not subject to external control. That's the combined definition for free that I'm proposing. So one thing that is important to discuss is how I selected these definitions for freedom, or the word free. Like you go to different dictionaries, there's multiple different definitions. Well, why did I select these? Well, I selected these because I think that these are the most relevant and useful for the free will debate. They add the most clarity. They target the problems that we're trying to dissect. They target the issues that we're trying to resolve, right? So just to be fair, I want to show you some of the other definitions and kind of walk through why I'm doing what I'm doing. Not under the control or power of another. It's a little bit too specific, right? It's too concrete. When we're dealing with free will, it's more abstract. So instead of focusing on like interpersonal relationships, not being under control is more abstract than not being under the control of another person, right? So trying to get a more abstracted definition is more useful for the free will debate. Able or permitted to take a specific action. Yeah, it's kind of useful, but it's also really specific. I think what I've already defined covers this instance in a more abstract, flexible, generic way. Right here, free means subject neither to foreign dominion nor despotic government. Right, this is like really specific examples that it's not good for the debate. Not a slave, way too specific. I mean, it's kind of useful in a metaphoric way, but I think our definition covers that type of issue. Denoting an ethnic or political group actively opposing or occupying. See, these are way too specific, like World War II. Like, we're not talking about World War II in our free will debate. Not or no longer confined or imprisoned. Okay, we're getting to this constraint idea. Confined is too narrow. Constraint is a more flexible interpretation. Not physically restrained, obstructed, or fixed. Okay. Disengaged or available of power or energy. This is in physics, a physics definition of freedom. Not exactly what we're talking about. The free will debate is a little bit more about agency, not about energy, right? Not bound physics, chemistry, not bound in an atom. Well, see, this is too narrow. And I'm afraid I'm boring you, but I want to walk you through my methodology so you understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. So, not subject to or constrained by engagements or obligations. Okay, so this is overly specific by talking about obligations. Constraint, that's the useful portion. That's what I included in the definition of free. So like down here, given or available without charge. This is free in a monetary sense. We're not talking about money. So if you want, you can go through these definitions and you can debate me. Maybe you have a different definition of free that you think is better. I think that this is not, I think I've extracted the useful, important, valuable definitions of free from the available definitions. So at risk of boring you, I'll stop there. And just to let you know, I have sourced these definitions. So at the bottom of my blog, I've referenced where these definitions came from. I didn't completely make these definitions up. I selected these definitions from the large list of available definitions for the word free. So I've aggregated the definitions that I believe are useful from all of the available definitions. All right, so now for will, right? The other half of free will is the word will. What does will mean? So some definitions here. The faculty of conscious and deliberate action. Okay, conscious and deliberate action. Or the power of control the mind has over one's actions. Another definition, to cause or try to cause something to happen by using the power of your mind. Again, another definition, the mental power used to control and direct your thoughts and actions. Okay. Another one, the power of control over one's actions or emotions. All right, so all of these definitions, they're kind of pointing in a certain direction, but I have a couple issues with these available definitions. And so I took more liberty at re-engineering the definition of will here. So feel free to disagree, but I think what I'm doing with the word will is more useful for the free will debate. So there's a lot of baggage in some of these definitions, right? The faculty of conscious, deliberate action. The power of control the mind has over one's actions. Like, it's almost assuming dualism. It's assuming that the mind is the soul that has power to puppeteer the body and control the actions. Like, that's mystical baggage from a dualistic religious era. Like, none of that is proven. A lot of that is illogical and or debunked by neuroscience. So if our words are tethered to superstitious magic of the past, it hurts the utility of the word, right? So it's like, why do we want to burden our vocabulary with irrational stuff? It's like, okay, let's subtract the irrationality. What is the word pointing to? Okay, because that's what words do. When we use words, we're trying to point to something, right? This is the concept of ostensibility, right? Words, like in the external world, are all these ontologies, and when we use a word, we're pointing to an ontology. Dog is that thing over there. Cat is that thing over there. Will is that thing in here. Okay, but we don't know what this thing is. What are we trying to point to, right? Because that's what the debate is about. Is the thing that we're pointing to, is that thing free, right? And so we need to figure out what we're pointing to, and we don't want to encumber our language with, if we're pointing to a ghost, then you don't have a will because there's no ghost. So let's figure out a more rational thing to point to. We can have a more intelligent debate. So my definition here, will is the process of converting desires into decisions, okay? So this definition, it subtracts out any unprovable or unproven metaphysical baggage, like powers of deliberate control from this mystical source, right? Get rid of all that. We know that there's a process. Like, we can rationally say, there's a process going on in here. We don't know about these powers. We're not sure about these powers of control, but we're sure that there's a process. There's a flow from A to B, and we know that desires exist somewhere in there. And we know that decisions exist somewhere in there, and there's a process, and we produce these decisions, okay? So I think that this this will definition subtracts out some clutter, gets a little clarity, it gets a more parsimonious perspective on what will is, and I think it lets us think about this at a more scientific level, a more neuroscientific, rational level of, okay, we know that there's a process in there. Now let's analyze that process and let's see how free this process really is. So here I have a little diagram to help illustrate how this will definition works. We've got a variety of desires, and then we've got neurological processes that process these desires, probably do a lot of things like generate goals, analyze options, and then evaluate the options against these values and desires, see which thing optimizes your values, optimizes your goal, and then makes a selection. So there's a lot of there's a lot of algorithmic baggage behind these arrows in this process. It's a debatable how this process works, but somehow these desires go through some process and it outputs a decision. Okay, I'm calling this the will. And now one thing that you should note is that the end point of the will, as defined here, is the decision. Now, if we go back to these definitions I've collected, a lot of these involve actions, right? Power to control, power over one's actions, cause things to happen. It's kind of alluding to action. Thoughts and actions or emotions. Okay, so I am kind of intentionally excluding actions from this paradigm of will. And you'll see why pretty soon. Another important definition in the free will debate is the concept of basic desert. Desert is the noun for deserve. So what do people deserve? So basic desert, basic deserve. And the definition here is basic desert is the sense that the agent would deserve to be blamed or praised just because he or she has performed a certain action. So what does deserve mean, right? This kind of deserve, I think it's kind of like an external should. So there's an agent, there's an individual, and the individual does X, okay? Individual does X. Now what they deserve is the external shoulds. So should society, right? Should society reward this behavior or should society punish this behavior? But instead of reward and punish, it's blame or praise. So it's an attitude. Should society have good feelings about this action or should society have bad feelings about this performance of an action? And so basic desert, it's kind of getting at the root of what should our attitude be about agents performing actions, right? Does it make sense to say, oh, you're such a good robot. Like this robot, it did a really good thing. You're such a good robot. Does that make sense for society to do that to good robots? Or if a robot is bad, if a robot has bad programming, it does bad things, should the society say, ooh, that's a bad robot. Ooh, bad robot, right? So it's a little bit debatable how we want to think about basic desert. All right, now back to free will. The funny thing about language is that the combination of two words does not necessarily mean the combination of each word individually, because language is anarchy. Anyone can do whatever they want with language. Lots of people have been talking about free will, and they've come up with definitions for free will that are independent of the definitions of free and will. So let's go through, we've got 6 definitions here of how people have defined free will. So definition number 1 here, lack of necessity in human will. Necessity. Or the will does not have to be such as it is, right? So that's alluding to the next one, which is the ability to do otherwise, right? So alternate timelines, alternate possibilities. That's one way to define free will. The next one here, the strongest control condition, right? Strongest control condition, whatever that turns out to be, necessary for moral responsibility, i.e. basic desert. So in the philosophy of moral responsibility, often people say that basic desert is the requirement for moral responsibility. So if an agent can be blamed or praised, then they can also be held responsible. But if they cannot be blamed or praised, then they cannot be held responsible. That's a common thought process. And so this free will, this definition is operating, it's saying free will equals you have enough control to be responsible. That's an interesting definition. Next, a type of decision-making process that is not controlled by algorithm, such that it could not be replicated in a robot. Okay, so this is my preferred approach. My preferred approach is to think about free will in terms of contrasting humans with robots. And this is because I think the biggest aspect of the free will debate is distinguishing humans from robots, right? I come from a theist background and I debate lots of theists, and a common theistic impulse is we are not robots. We are not meat robots. How dare you, atheist, call us meat robots? We transcend robotic processes. We are divine children of God. We have divine souls. We have divine powers of agency. And we are not algorithmic, right? We are not following the laws of physics, right? We transcend that. Somehow, some way, we do. That's the theistic libertarianism perspective on free will. And so that's what I think is the root of this debate. It's the debate over the nature of the human. Do we reduce to robotic processes or not? And so I think that a definition of free will that revolves around this robot distinction cuts straight to the core of what most of us are interested in thinking about and debating about. So that's a useful definition for getting to that issue. And this last definition here, a type of control over one's behavior that does not reduce to randomness. Okay, and this alludes to the determinism versus indeterminism debate, and a lot of libertarians who invoke indeterminism, they do not invoke randomness. So it's a type of indeterminate control that's not random. Because dice, we don't think of our free will as the same as dice, right? That's just, free will is not a dice roll. That's just not what people are talking about, right? So we have to have something that's not determinism, but it's also not randomness. Something else is free will, right? That's also a useful definition. Okay, so the next part here is our aggregate synthetic definition of free will that kind of merges these concepts together into a cohesive, comprehensive definition. But I noticed a little bit of a problem with my definition, so I did a little bit of editing to this document just now. So yeah, I want to, I'm still undecided about this basic desert concept. So some people like to tether the free will debate to the moral responsibility debate. And I am a little bit more, I don't know if agnostic is the right word. I feel like these two debates can be held separately. So I almost feel like there's moral entangling that might add to the confusion of the debate. So I'm not 100% sure which of these definitions is better, okay? But I think that the second one is better because it subtracts out the moral entanglement that might complexify the debate. Okay, so what do I mean? Right here, basic desert definition. Free will is the capacity for a process of converting desires into decisions. Okay, capacity, you have, an agent has something, right? They have a process. We have a process, converts desires into decisions. That's our will. At the level of will, so we have a capacity for a process for this, doing this thing, that at the level of the will, so this is a context. So we're focusing, the freedom is operating at the context of the will. This is key, because a lot of people confuse their definition of free will by getting the context wrong, okay? So the freedom is, this process is independent, it's unconstrained, it's not limited, it's not subject to external control. So we've got our freedom components. But we're talking about this will. At the level of the will, the process is independent, unconstrained, not limited, not subject to external control. So we're talking neuroscience, right? The will is fundamentally neuroscience. So just to add clarity, I limited the will to this decision process to keep us in the domain of neuroscience. When we're talking about the will, we're talking about how does your brain work, right? I think that's the key to the debate. Everyone wants to know, what are we up here? Is this brain, is it based on soul magic? Is it based on robotic algorithms? What is going on up here? So I think limiting the scope of the will to neuroscience is key to getting clarity and cutting straight to the core of what the debate is actually about. Now here is the controversial part, for me at least. The basic desert definition is saying that you have this capacity, and this capacity gives you basic desert, right? So your capacity to make decisions is so free that you can have basic desert, right? So basic desert functions as a threshold. So the freedom, there might be a spectrum of freedom, and this definition is saying you have so much freedom that it gives you basic desert. Okay. Now this is kind of my preference. I think it's useful to add this to the definition of free will as an extension, right? So this capacity for making decisions, it's free, and it's so free. So these are my thresholds. It's free in such a way that it's not algorithmic nor robotic. Okay. So that's my threshold, my ideal threshold for freedom. In order for you to have free will, your level of freedom has to transcend the robotic, or else what are we talking about? You know what I mean? It's like, why are you saying robots are free? Like, it's just a very strange adjective to apply to robots. Like, there's hundreds of other adjectives that are much more accurate in describing a robot, right? Robots are algorithmic, they're procedural, they're calculative, they're optimizing. Like, yes, robots are all of those things. Why would you use the word free? You're just bastardizing the word free if you apply it to a robot. Like, why dilute the meaning of the word free? So I have big issues with compatibilists. Compatibilists, they want to redefine free as robotic. I'm like, why? Stop it. You're just making everything worse by confusing terms, muddying the waters, making it harder to have a coherent debate. So I put these two different definitions here. There's a non-basic desert definition here where I just subtract out this criterion. So some people like to have basic desert be the threshold for freedom. I don't think I like it. I think mixing in morality, and it's like, within, people talk about the is-ought gap. There's the is stuff, and then there's the ought stuff. It's like, let's just have one debate at a time, guys. Like, why do two debates at the same time? We've got the is debate, we've got the ought debate. Okay, let's put the oughts to the side. Let's focus on the is. How much freedom is on the is half? The neuroscience is the is. Let's just focus on the is right now, right? We can worry about the oughts later. What is the case, right? So I think it's probably useful to just get rid of the basic desert from the definition of free will. All right, now we're moving into the definition of agents and agency. I think this is crucial, so crucial, to distinguish will from agency, because I think half of the debate is confusion over conflating terms. Like, some people think free will is the same as agency, and like, no, stop. They're not the same. Let's get some clarity. Let's separate these terms from each other, because the terms are more useful when we separate them. Because, like we said, words are pointing to things, right? There's two different things that we're pointing to, right? The will points to the brain. The agent points to the body. Okay, that's basically the distinction. Mind and body, two different things to point to. It's very useful to separate those and not get confused. Like, if I'm talking to you about the brain and then you start talking to me about the body, we're talking past each other and we don't even realize it, right? I'm talking to you about free will. I'm talking about neuroscience. Then you talk to me about agency and you call agency free will, and you're talking about the body. It's like, well, I don't have handcuffs, Seth, so that means I have free will. It's like, no. Handcuffs is at the level of the body. Different topic. That's agency, okay? Very important to distinguish in order that we can, be on the same page, right? So, agent. Agent is a being with the capacity to act. That's a body, right? Agent, it's a unified entity that is distinguishable from its environment and that it's doing something by itself in accord with certain goals, okay? unified entity. It's got boundary conditions, like a bacteria. It's got a cellular wall, a bubble around itself. That's a boundary. It's distinguishable from everything outside the boundary, right? And it has goals. Go get the food, like basic goal, right? So bacteria can be goals. Bacteria can be agents because they have goals and they have boundaries, right? They've got a body. So that makes it very simple to think about agents. So basically, basically the important thing here is that it's very easy to be classified as an agent. So the threshold for agency is a low bar. Bacteria can do it, robots can do it, NPCs can do it. Lots of things can have agency. They have agency by being an agent. So agency, let's go through some definitions to get more clarity. Capacity to act intentionally. Okay, that's a little bit higher level because intentionality kind of implies consciousness. Bacteria, they might not have consciousness. So that's a little bit higher threshold of agency. Next definition, the property or capacity of actors to make things happen. That's a lot lower threshold for agency. You just have to do things. That's easy. The next definition, the capacity, condition, or state of acting or exerting power. That's a pretty low threshold. Anything that does things is exerting power. Next definition, intentional actions initiated by the agent, explained in terms of causation by the agent's mental states and events. Initiated by the agent consists in causation by the relevant desired belief pairs. Okay, this is a more philosophically advanced definition. This definition is a higher threshold. It includes intentionality. It includes causation, mental states, right? Desire belief pairs. Right? That's an interesting combination. So that's a higher threshold for agency. And this last definition here, a power to act or not to act according as the mind directs. Okay, so we've got a couple of options on how we want to think about agency here. This is the definition that I have chosen. The operational definition for agency, I've tried to kind of look at these other definitions, try to extract what's relevant, take in the prior conceptualizations, and mix them into this one. So I think that this is a useful way to think about agency. The definition I have here is agency is the capacity for a process of converting decisions into actions. And it must be goal-oriented, uncoerced, intentional, and not random in nature. So as you can see here, we have a robotic agent, and this robotic agent has a decision, and it's trying to manifest that decision into an action. So this definition of converting decisions into actions makes agency a very bodily process, right? And that's important to separate that mind and body, zoom in on the bodily aspect of agency, and it helps us separate out different concerns, right? So when we're talking about agency, often people talk about, coercion. Coercion, if someone has a gun to your head and they say, oh, you wanted to decide to go that way, but guess what? I'm coercing you. Because I have a gun to your head, you can't do what you're going to decide to do, or I'll kill you. So you have to change your decision to do what I want you to do, right? So that's external bodily considerations, right? So at the level of the will, there might be internal coercive factors, and at the level of agency, there's external coercive factors, right? So I think that's the useful way to distinguish these concepts. We need to think about what is altering the bodily dynamics and what is altering the mental dynamics, right? So if someone's putting a gun to your head, you don't have agency. If someone is putting handcuffs on your arms, you can't manifest the action that you want to manifest. If you're in a jail cell, you can't manifest the actions you want to manifest, right? If someone drugs you, you can't utilize your intentionality to manifest your actions, right? There's these external factors that are stopping your actions. So I think this is the most useful way to think about agency, is putting it into this bodily context of navigating the world. Do you have the power to navigate as you want to navigate? And so the usefulness of splitting agency and will, splitting them apart in this way, is because I think that the compatibilists are taking the debate down the agency pathway, right? And the libertarians are taking the debate down the will pathway, right? The libertarians are going the neuroscience pathway. The compatibilists are going the robotic pathway. And so we need to get on the same page. And so by separating will and agency from each other, I think it's useful to say, hey, compatibilists, you can have the word agency. That's your puppy, right? The compatibilists, they want to say, oh, free will is equal to the capacity to do what you want to do, right? And I want to say, no, that's not what free will is. Free will is not the capacity to do the actions you want to do. That's agency, okay? Agency is the bodily freedom to do what you want to do. Free will is the mental freedom. Mental freedom is different from bodily freedom. Separate the two different debates, okay? So to combine the concepts of freedom with agency, for free agent, we have someone whose actions are not limited or controlled by anyone else, okay? This definition it's pointing to external factors, these relationships between bodies, right? So now to my combined definition. Again, I split it two different ways. So there's one definition that includes causal responsibility and another that separates it out. Like I said, I'm not exactly sure which path is best, so I'll just give you both paths and let you think about it. Free agency, the capacity for a process of converting decisions into actions at the level of the agent, context, that is independent, unconstrained, not limited, not subject to external control, such that it can provide the foundation for causal responsibility. Also, it must be goal-oriented, uncoerced, intentional, and not random in nature. Okay? Free agency. So, kind of complex definitions. I apologize, complex topic. But basically, free agency is your ability to do actions is free at the level of the agent. I think that's one of the most important parts of the definition, is when we say at the level of the agent, we're talking about at the level of the body. Is the body free to do the actions, right? Is the body free? And then the free will goes to, is the mind free? Two different questions. Now, causal responsibility, a lot of people worry in the free will debate. They're worried about responsibility. And so if you're super worried about responsibility, maybe you want this as part of the definition, right? Because maybe this agency can give you some responsibility. It's like your body, it did the thing, right? And you were free to do the thing. No, like nobody had a gun to your head and said, go rob the bank. Your body freely robbed the bank, and we can attribute the cause to you. The cause is not external to you. The cause is your body, not some other body. And so we can link you to the cause of this, and we can blame you, and we can put you in jail. Like maybe you want that as part of the definition. But I think it might be useful to just leave that to be a second order debate. Let's just focus on the facts. Is the agent free or not, right? So yeah, the non-causal responsibility definition, it just subtracts out the causal responsibility from this definition. So basically that's that. Causation. Causation is very important to the free will debate. Definition 1, a relation that holds between two temporarily simultaneous or successive events when the first event, the cause, brings about the other, the effect. So cause brings about effect. Right? In a chain of dominoes, the cause is the first domino, the effect is the second domino. And the first domino, you could say it forces the next domino to activate. David Hume, philosopher David Hume, he talked about causation. He said, when we say of two types of object or event that X causes Y, example, fire causes smoke, what we mean is that X's are constantly conjoined with Y's, and Y's follow X's and not vice versa, and there is a necessary connection between X's and Y's such that whenever an X occurs, a Y must follow. Okay, so Hume is making a more robust definition of causation. Basically, the first criteria is conjoined or correlation, and sequence. Y follows X. So first there's a correlation, then there's a sequential relationship, and then there's necessity. Okay, so that if you don't do the X, then you don't get the Y. Right? That's necessity. So that's cool. Now, I like to use the prefix meta. In this context, when I say metacause, I'm just referring to the cause of a cause. So if there's dominoes and there's domino A, B, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, etc. For domino C, the cause of domino C is domino B, because B came before C. But then the metacause would be domino A, right? So domino C has a cause, and domino C also has a metacause, right? The cause that came before. Determine. The word determine is very important to the free will debate. Definitions here. Determine means to cause, affect, or control, or to fix or decide causally. Okay, so there's multiple ways to think about determination on a spectrum of intensity. There's low intensity determination and high intensity determination. So what we're talking about here is more high intensity determination, right? We're causing and it's necessary, right? So you could have unnecessary causation or you could have necessary causation. And predictability is another component, right? To fix, right? When we're graphing something out, the points on the graph are fixed. We've got a slope and it's predictable. We can calculate the future of the slope. That destiny is fixed along a predictive slope. So determination, to determine, could include the idea of predictability. It's like the dominoes. We see domino A leads to domino B, it leads to domino C. We can draw a line and we can predict all of these dominoes. They're going to keep going. We can predict that domino Z necessarily follows this chain, right? So this is very tight, very high intensity determination. The causation is there, necessity is there, the predictability is there. And with all of this intensity, it creates a single possible causal pathway. Like the dominoes, they must flow in a single pathway. There's no randomness. That last domino is definitely dropping because we've mapped it out perfectly. And so I call this tight determination, tightly determined, right? But we don't have to think about determination so tightly. We can be a little bit more flexible, right? So to be a cause does not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily imply we can predict the future. It's like sometimes we don't know the future, but we know what happened right before. It's like someone might have an outburst of anger. It's like nobody predicted that they would have an outburst of anger, but we know what caused it because something happened right before that pissed them off. And a reasonable person could get pissed off, but we didn't expect them to blow up, right? There's different types of reactions to getting pissed off. And that was just one of the possible reactions, but it was definitely caused, right? So you can subtract predictability from determination, and you can subtract necessity, right? So there could be multiple possibilities, like there could be a little bit of randomness. It's like maybe it's this possibility, maybe it's that possibility. Causation doesn't have to be so tight, right? But it depends on how you want to use the word, right? So, and this is people talk past each other. So when people say determined, I think it's useful to say, well, do you mean tightly determined or do you mean loosely determined? So let's not talk past each other. Let's be a little bit more clear. Are you including necessity? Are you including predictability? Or are you not, right? And then now we're on the same page. So just a little graph here. The metacause, the cause, the effect. With tight determination, there's one trajectory. We know it's not trajectory A, it's not trajectory C, it's trajectory B. And we can predict where this trajectory is going. But with loose determination, it's more chaotic. We're not exactly sure which trajectory it's going to, and we're not exactly which effect will be triggered. All right, now to the ideologies. We have determinism. Determinism is the idea that all events are determined, right? So basically, all things are causal dominoes. Another definition, all events have a cause. That's much more flexible, right? Another definition, all events are the outcome of chains of cause and effect. Another definition, everything has a cause that fixes its future necessarily to one predictable in principle fate. Okay, so that definition includes predictability into determinism. All events, including human action, are ultimately determined by causes external to the will. So that involves ultimate causes or meta causes. It's going back through the dominoes. Maybe dominoes XYZ are you, but all of the dominoes before X are your DNA, your parental environment, the things that happen to your parents, you know, the grandparents and great-grandparents and environmental factors and weather. All of those dominoes came before your birth, right? So we're going back in time to these ultimate causes. Another definition, all events in the universe, including human decisions and actions, are causally inevitable. Okay, that goes to the necessity aspect, right? There's just necessity that are tying all of these dominoes together. This domino has to trigger this domino. There's no randomness. This, right? And then this last definition here, it is never true that people could have decided or acted otherwise than they actually did. So this is the alternate possibilities, alternate timelines. Is everything fixed into one timeline, or were there other possibilities? So these are different flavors of determinism. And we need to be careful how we navigate these, because there's some crucial distinctions kind of hidden behind these definitions. Now for the opposite of determinism. The logical opposite is indeterminism, right? So if determinism is the idea that everything is determined, indeterminism is the idea that some things are not determined, okay? Logical opposite is the idea that only one can be true. So either everything is determined or not everything is determined, right? So indeterminism, not everything is determined. Some things are not determined. Some events do not have a cause. So remember, determined is kind of a flexible idea. There's three components. It's kind of like determined. It's like maybe there's some causation, maybe there's some necessity, maybe there's some predictability. So determined is on a spectrum. So we can zoom in and just say, well, some events do not have a cause. That's a different type of indeterminism. Then we can, in terms of thinking about this cause, another definition would be some events are not the outcome of chains of cause and effect, right? So you could have all the dominoes, and it's like, okay, all of these dominoes are determined, but then something random happens outside of this chain of dominoes. That thing that happened outside the chain of dominoes, that's indeterminism. That was not determined by the chain of dominoes. Another definition, some things lack a cause that a certain type of cause, a cause that fixes its future, right? Fixing. A cause that fixes its future necessarily to one predictable, in principle, fate. So this definition of indeterminism is about multiple possible pathways, right? Could have done otherwise. So if things are not fixed, right? Then there's indeterminism according to that definition. Another one, at least some events have no deterministic cause but occur randomly or by chance. Okay, so this gets into the randomness angle of indeterminism. So when you think about randomness, you can kind of infer that random things do not have causes. So it's kind of like no cause is part of the component of why randomness is the way it is, right? Next one, indeterminists do not have to deny that causes exist. Okay, so this is an interesting angle for thinking about indeterminism. So what we've talked about so far is kind of indeterminism has no cause. This definition says indeterminate things do have causes, but the type of causes that they have are, it says they do not constrain the future to a single course, right? And they can maintain only necessary and not sufficient causes. So what they're saying is that it's more probabilistic. So there are causes, but these are probabilistic causes. That's probably the easiest way to simplify that one. Last definition here, indeterminism can be defined as the existence of multiple real possibilities for the future. Okay, multiple real possibilities. That's back to is it one fixed domino path or is it an open pathway thing? So that's kind of the indeterminism stuff. So here we have determinism is the logical opposite of indeterminism. So under this paradigm, you could have loose determinism with its opposite being loose indeterminism, tight determinism and its opposite tight indeterminism. So everything has a cause is loose determinism, and loose indeterminism, some things lack a cause, right? Tight determinism, everything has a cause that fixes its future necessarily and to one predictable in principle fate. Okay? And then tight indeterminism, some things lack a cause that fixes its future necessarily to one predictable in principle fate. So I think these are useful ways to distinguish between how tight we're interpreting these words so that we don't talk past each other. Definitions for randomness. Random is in a way that does not follow a particular plan or pattern. Random is events or data that acts of its own accord. It will show no recognized pattern or direction that can be plotted for the anticipation of future actions. A random event or action is not planned and cannot be determined. Random is proceeding, made, or occurring without definite aim, reason, or pattern. Random is every point or location in an area has an equal chance of being chosen for sampling as any other point in that area. Random, it should be impossible to guess the next session key based on knowledge of past session keys. So that kind of hints at predictability. Random is determined solely by chance. Random is a value in a set of numbers that has an equal probability of being selected from the total population of possibilities and, in that sense, is unpredictable. Random. Every possibility is of equal probability. Random. Not caused, not determined. All right, so those are a lot of ways to think about random. I think randomness is going to be useful when thinking about quantum physics. That's often appealed to for randomness. Some of these definitions would accept quantum physics, some of them would reject quantum physics, because there are arguments that quantum physics has degrees of predictability. It's not equal probability. There's a cloud of probabilities, right? So there's a probability distribution is not random. So we can kind of see the flow of quantum physics. There is a pattern, right, that can be plotted. Now, the smaller you go, the more random. The bigger you go, the less random. All right, now we're going to get into types of determinism. And the important thing to understand is that there's different views on the causal chain, right? People think about the universe as like a causal chain. And strict determinism could be interpreted as a single causal chain pathway through the universe. So there's the Big Bang, and then all of these dominoes. It's a single line of dominoes that leads to the present day. Because of that, everything is kind of forced to happen by that initial Big Bang domino, right? So keep this in mind as we walk through some of these types of determinism. Another way of thinking about it is this multiple possible causal chain pathways kind of mixes in some indeterminism, where it's like there's a little bit of randomness. So, the Big Bang happened and the atoms, they could have gone to the left, or the atoms, they could have gone to the right, but then they went through this middle pathway and then they triggered the domino effect, going down this middle pathway, leading to the present day. Under this multiple possible causal chain pathways, there's a little bit of freedom, metaphysical freedom to things didn't have to be the way they are, right? So let's go back up here and walk through these. Single causal chain pathway, pure determinism or strict determinism. So nomological determinism is the first one here. This is the notion that the past and the present dictate the future entirely and necessarily by rigid natural laws, and that every occurrence inevitably results from prior events. So nomological is referring to laws, so like laws of physics. And so they're basically saying that the laws of physics make everything necessary, like dominoes. Okay, so a law-oriented perspective of determinism is nomological determinism. Next one is predeterminism. This is the idea that all events are determined in advance. So this is the idea that the Big Bang basically decided the future. So everything in the future is in principle able to be predicted by the initial conditions, right? So if someone had like God level intelligence, they could look at the Big Bang and say, I know what Bob is going to do in 10,000 years. 10 billion years, whatever. So that's predeterminism. Next one is necessitarianism. Necessitarianism. It's a metaphysical principle that denies all mere possibility and maintains that there is only one possible way for the world to exist. So this is it sounds like nomological determinism, but I think it's more meta than that. So what do I mean? The universe. Think about the universe like a diagram, right? And on the diagram, there are the laws of physics, right? So the laws of physics are written on this blueprint for a universe, right? So nomological determinism is we're following the blueprint. And now necessitarianism is the idea that there are no alternative blueprints. So you could say, well, why not? Why do we have these laws of physics? Why not a different law of physics? Necessitarianism is saying we have to have this set of laws of physics. So it's a little bit more metaphysical, different angle for looking at the problems. All right, the next one is fatalism. Fatalism is a tricky one. there's different interpretations of fatalism. There's like a really dumb version and basically a more rational version. Fatalism, it orients around the idea of fate, right? Fatalism, fate. So fate is like destiny. It's about the future. So what it says here is that fatalism is normally distinguished from determinism as a form of teleological determinism. Fatalism is the idea that everything is fated to happen, resulting in humans having no control over their future. So the dumb way of thinking about fatalism is basically the idea of, it's like you have a vision of your future. It's like in the future, XYZ happens. So it's like my fate is XYZ. And then the question is, well, should I do action A? Should I do action B? Should I do action C? It's like maybe I'm trying to avoid XYZ. So I'm like trying all these different actions to avoid XYZ. And fatalism is no matter what you do, you still get XYZ. XYZ is inescapable because action A leads to XYZ, action B leads to XYZ, and action C leads to XYZ. There's no action pathway that allows you to escape your fate, right? So this is kind of a weird, it's kind of a prophecy-oriented perspective, right? It's like this prophecy is going to happen no matter what. That's a weird type of ideology. But the other way to think about fatalism is just predeterminism. It's the inverse of predeterminism. So predeterminism says from the Big Bang's perspective, like the future is calculatable in principle. There's all this necessary stuff that's going to happen. It was all decided at the Big Bang. Decided, air quotes. Fatalism is from the future looking backwards. It's like, okay, the future is going to happen, and all of the causes before the future are basically forced to happen such that the future happens. And so it's kind of two different angles of looking at the same single chain of dominoes. So do with that one as you will. All right, now we have wave function determinism. So this I think is basically talked about by Lawrence Krauss, physicist Lawrence Krauss. He emphasizes that the evolution of the quantum wave function is governed by deterministic Schrödinger equation, which is a second-order differential equation, which allows the prediction of a system's state at any future time if its initial state is known. While acknowledging that the outcomes of quantum measurements, such as the position or momentum of a particle, are probabilistic, Krauss maintains that these outcomes occur within a deterministic framework that governs the wave function itself. He further suggests that despite the apparent randomness in individual quantum events, the collective behavior of many particles, like decay rates in radioactivity, can be deterministically described, highlighting a macroscopic predictability in quantum systems. This perspective bridges individual quantum randomness with overarching deterministic principles, suggesting a coherent deterministic view of the quantum mechanics at larger scales. So Lawrence Krauss, he's basically saying that yes, quantum mechanics has an element of randomness, but it's encapsulated within determinism. So the determinism is controlling the randomness, and the math shows that the determinism is controlling the randomness. So it's not pure randomness, it's determined randomness, and the determinism hence plays a more significant role than the indeterminism. So it's a deterministic view of reality that says that the quantum particles are following a deterministic trajectory despite a little bit of wiggle along the trajectory. It's like, who cares about the wiggle? We know where this thing is going. You know what I mean? All right, now for the multiple possible causal chain pathway ideologies. These could mix in a little indeterminism, so it's a little bit hard how to classify these. Like, you could call them indeterminism if you want. It's, these determinism and indeterminism we already talked about. It kind of exists on a spectrum, so Just be clear about how you're talking about them is the main takeaway. But we've got here causal determinism. It's the idea that every event is necessitated by antecedent events and conditions together with the laws of nature. Causal determinism proposes that there is an unbroken chain of prior occurrences stretching back to the origin of the universe. Causal determinists believe that there is nothing in the universe that has no cause or is self-caused. So, like at first glance, this sounds very strict, like strict determinism, like unbroken chain of dominoes, right? The reason why I'm putting this in the flexible camp is because I think causes can be interpreted flexibly, right? We don't have to say that causes imply fixed predictability and necessity. We can say that causes can be probabilistic, right? There's like, we could say that domino A is a dice roll, right? And dice roll A causes dice roll B, and dice roll B causes dice roll C, right? And so there's a chain of causes, but each of those causes is probabilistic. And so it's not necessarily fixed to just one pathway because each instance of the pathway has multiple possibilities. So that's my take on that one. Next one is biological determinism. I feel like I don't know about this one that much. I feel like there's some, like there might be some like social context where some groups of people might use this in ways I'm not aware of. But the definition I came across is biological determinism is the idea that all human behaviors, beliefs, and desires are fixed by human genetic nature. Biological processes could potentially harness a little quantum randomness, but in the end, the result would still be biological causation. So it seems like a very genetic, materialist view of human behavior. And it seems a little bit more narrow in scope. Like it's not thinking about the universe, it's thinking about an individual. And it's saying this individual's behavior is because of their genes. So it's kind of it seems a little bit narrow in scope for the purposes of the free will debate. And it seems pretty false because environment and culture, play such a huge role. Why would you say genes are everything? It seems a little strange. But that's one angle to think about, I guess. Adequate determinism. It's the idea, because of quantum decoherence, that quantum indeterminacy can be ignored for most macroscopic events. Quantum events, they average out. So, especially when there's large numbers of particles. So, where the laws of quantum mechanics asymptotically approach the laws of classical mechanics. So, basically, this is the idea that it's kind of like saying, yes, quantum mechanics includes randomness, but it's kind of like, if you roll different dice, the dice are going to cancel each other out. You got a dice on the left, you got a dice on the right hand side. They kind of average out to the middle. And so this statistical averaging out creates a meta-determinism, a meta-statistical determinism, where as things bubble up into bigger and bigger, if you throw a ton of dice rolls and you create a big object, this big object starts to become very classically deterministic. And so all of this little tiny randomness becomes irrelevant in the macroscopic picture. So that's adequate determinism. It's like, yes, there's randomness, but who cares? It's irrelevant. Probabilistic determinism or statistical determinism. It seems very similar to adequate determinism. This form suggests that while events are determined, they are determined in a probabilistic sense. This means given a set of initial conditions, there are multiple possible outcomes, each with a certain probability. And so this can be talked about with quantum mechanics. Another one is non-linear determinism. In systems described by non-linear dynamics, like chaotic systems, small differences in the initial conditions can lead to vastly different outcomes. This is known as sensitive dependence on initial conditions, also known as the butterfly effect. So while the system's behavior is deterministic, predicting the exact future state becomes practically impossible due to the exponential growth of any small initial difference. So this one, I'm trying to think, maybe this one should be considered more strict determinism, because this one's not incorporating randomness. I might have this misclassified. This one is talking about, it's all deterministic, but the algorithms are so chaotic that prediction becomes impossible. So, determinism, there's the spectrum. Predictability is part of the determinism spectrum. So this one subtracts predictability. So if your determinism requires predictability, this one is indeterministic. So it's classified correctly if that's how you define indeterminism. So language, man. Complex definitions. All right, last one here. Soft determinism, or i.e. compatibilism. Though not explicitly about multiple causal pathways in the physical sense, soft determinism is philosophically relevant as it argues that free will and determinism are compatible. It suggests that human behavior is determined by internal and external causes, but it still allows for moral responsibility and a form of free choice within determined constraints. Yeah, this one, compatibilism. Do with that one as you will. It's what it is. Single causal chain pathways, multiple causal chain pathways. This is tricky metaphysics. Hopefully that helped you kind of feel out some different ways of thinking about these problems. Finally, we're going to talk about the types of stances in the free will debate. There are three popular stances. The first is hard incompatibilism. This is my stance, which is the denial of free will. To say free will does not exist. So basically, incompatible, what we're talking about is free will is incompatible with both determinism and indeterminism, right? So hard incompatibilism, incompatible with both. Because it's incompatible with both, it does not exist. So it includes this idea that the necessity of causation destroys free will. And the lack of causation, i.e. randomness, also destroys free will. So determinism destroys free will, indeterminism destroys free will. And this rejects the compatibilist stance that the origin of one's values and desires is irrelevant to the question of free will. So, like, maybe I'll just keep going down the list instead of explaining, because compatibilism's right there. So basically, if the origin of one's values and desires is not free, then the will is not free. That's kind of the stance. So compatibilists, they like to ignore where these things came from. Whereas if the dominoes gave you your desires, if the dominoes are not free, then that means your desires are not free. And so your will that flows out of your desires is not free. So that's that. Okay, compatibilism. I like to call this agentic free will. So the compatibilists, they're kind of redefining what free will is in a way. Their stance is that free will is compatible with determinism. So they think that freedom can be understood as the ability of an agent to act according to one's desires and intentions, even if these desires are determined by prior events. So basically, they think, who cares where my desires came from? Who cares about the dominoes that came before? Like, I can do what I desire, therefore I have freedom. Now notice I said the word do, right? Do is an action word. This is where the compatibilists go wrong. They're talking about agency, right? Agency is the domain of body and the domain of action. So they're switching freedom. They're saying, who cares about the mind's freedom? Let's focus on the body's freedom, right? And they're abandoning, they're just, it's a red herring. They're saying, don't look at the brain, look at the body. It's like they're trying to dodge the fact that the brain is unfree. So compatibilist free will, it means that your decisions are free from unwanted actions. So like hiccuping, It's like, oh, I don't want to hiccup. So, oh, my body hiccuped. Okay, that's not free will in the compatibilist framework, because you're doing something that you didn't decide, right? Decisions to actions, the algorithm of agency. If you're doing something you don't want, that's the failure of the agency, but they're calling agency free will for some crazy reason. Okay. Heart pumping, unconscious actions. Your heart pumps, you didn't decide on that. So you're doing a heart pump, and the doing of the heart pumping, or the heart beating, I mean, it's not based on your decision. So that's violating the agency paradigm, and they call agency free will. Forced actions, slavery, coerced actions, gun to your head, social and financial pressure, arranged marriages, internal manipulation, hypnosis, brainwashing, scientists stimulating the brain. These are all bodily manipulations. That's controlling your actions. This is all agency. Brain abnormalities, mental illness, brain tumor, addictions. These are things that are affecting your body and stopping your decisions from manifesting your actions properly. So, compatibilism, it posits that true freedom involves acting out rational self-determination, rather than being free from causality. If the determining factor is your desires, then it is free, right? So they're kind of, they're just dodging half the debate for some reason. The fact that one's desires and values might be slaves to physics and history is irrelevant to compatibilism. All right, last popular stance, libertarianism. I like to call this metaphysical free will. So libertarians, they believe free will exists despite any appearances of determinism or indeterminism. They think that free will is logically incompatible with complete determinism, or strict determinism, or pure determinism, and hence complete determinism must be false. Libertarianism requires that some actions are undetermined by prior causes. Some actions, they escape the chain of causation, or they're immune to the chain of causation. Certain aspects of the human mind elude deterministic laws, thus preserving the integrity of moral choice and responsibility. It's the idea that your brain can violate the laws of physics and that it can do what it wants. It's not a slave to the laws of physics operating on the materials of the brain, following the path of least resistance. So these are some diagrams of these positions. Hard incompatibilism, neither determinism nor randomness gives you free will. So the determinism is the puppeteering of the laws of physics, and the dice is the randomness. And so both of these things are affecting your will, and hence you don't have free will. Either one, like either paradigm, you don't have free will, because either of them controls your decisions in a way that violates the conditions of free will. Compatibilism, Sam Harris coined this phrase, a puppet is free as long as he loves his strings. So that's basically what compatibilism is. It says, well, yes, you are puppeteered, but we don't care about that because you like you like it. It's because you're doing what you want and that makes you happy. So who cares that you're a slave to your desires? Who cares that you're a slave to where your desires came from? You're happy about it. You're doing what you want. Well, let's just focus on the bright side, right? So, okay. And then libertarianism, or libertarian free will, it's the view that determinism is false. There is no puppeteering by the laws of physics, right? Some final definitions here. A robot. A robot is an electronic machine controlled by a computer which can move and do things that people can do, assumes the context of electronics, an electronic robot. Computer, it's an electronic machine that computes, which is to say that it processes data through algorithms to arrive at desired results. Algorithm. Algorithm is a step-by-step procedure for solving a problem or accomplishing some end. And a meat robot is a biological machine controlled by a system of neurological algorithms which can move and do other things in an agentic fashion. So, these are the important definitions to be thinking about in the free will debate. And feel free to check out my references and even John Locke's perspective on agency.